All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Hey everyone, Jody here. It is hard to believe, but we are already into holiday season for 2021. So over the next month or so, we're going to keep doing new shows, and we've also got some really cool end-of-year specials planned. One thing we're going to do is take a couple episodes and follow up on a bunch of tidbits from stories that we covered throughout the year. So if you have something you want us to follow up on, big or small, get in touch. We're also going to give ourselves, the whole team here, a little bit of time off. And so during those stretches, we will run back some of our favorite conversations from the year. So that's what we're going to do this week, Thanksgiving week, and then we'll be back with new episodes the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. We hope you have a great Thanksgiving, that you travel and stay safe and get to spend some time with friends and loved ones. And by the way, if any of those friends or loved ones say, hey, you got any podcast recommendations? You know what to do. Okay, let's get into it. Here's one of our favorite episodes from 2021. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, April 22nd, 1889, about 50,000 people are standing in the middle of nowhere, in what was then referred to as the unassigned lands in what is modern-day Oklahoma. The people lined up on the edge of a nearly 2 million acre tract of land, and then, right at noon, a gunshot. And the mad dash began. Would-be settlers rushed into the territory to claim their cheap land and establish their territory. By the end of the day, both Oklahoma City and Guthrie, Oklahoma had established cities of about 10,000 people. A week later, there were schools. Within a month, Oklahoma City had 5 banks, 6 newspapers. What I'm describing here is the Oklahoma land rush, a free-for-all moment that kind of feels like Capture the Flag meets Manifest Destiny. So here to talk about that very wild moment are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And our very special guest this episode is Sam Anderson, a writer for the New York Times Magazine and the author of a book called Boomtown, which is about this moment and all sorts of other strands that come together in Oklahoma City. So, Sam, thank you for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sam, you can cover your ears here, but I'm going to say some very flattering things. I think Boomtown is the best nonfiction book, maybe of the last 10 years or so.
Woo!
It is really genuine. I had to, you know what? I had to look that up because Warmth of Other Suns came out 10 years ago. So depending on when you did that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
But nevertheless, like seriously, there's no ceiling to the amount of praise that I can offer to Sam's book. It is really wonderful. And it does describe the chaos of this moment. So Sam, in my intro, I used things like lined up and there was a gunshot and everyone started. It wasn't that. It wasn't that orderly, right?
No, I mean, yeah, the way you described it is absurd, but the absurdity goes so many layers deep. And so much of what happened that day was just like wrong on every level. And just I think I describe it in the book as a bad idea executed very badly. The chaos was much deeper than that. you had, anywhere from 50,000 to sometimes people say 100,000 people. Obviously, it's hard to track, lining up around this kind of ill-defined border in the middle of what was then known as Indian Territory. So the border was 300 miles around. And some places it was, marked by a barbed wire fence or a big stone or a creek. Other places it was completely unmarked. Impossible to supervise that much territory. So you had settlers coming from literally all over the world, or at least as far away as Europe, and just finding what they thought was the best spot to wait for the signal to charge, or to not wait for the signal and sneak in and cheat. There were many, many, many cheaters that day. So I mean, yeah, and it wasn't just a gunshot. There were gunshots in some spots. There were in the northern edge, they actually held a long rope, and a bugler waited for the moment of noon to blow his bugle. And there's stories that, the moment the bugle touched his lips, a note didn't even come out. People just burst through the rope. Down south, there were people standing in the middle of a river, sinking in quicksand, waiting for the signal. You had cannons going off in other places. In other places, there was no supervision whatsoever. And so people were literally looking at their 19th century watch, which, watches differed very widely in terms of what time it actually was. So people were kind of just like trusting their gut and going for it. So it was total chaos, unregulated chaos.
Chaos for free land, right? Like there was something that was really driving these people, that the idea that they could have free land and all this opportunity that came with it. And you could just as cutthroat as like deals on Black Friday are, the idea that you could just get a free 160 acres of land is quite the thing. Yeah,
Jody said cheap land, but it was free land.
Yeah.
And this was, remember, 1889. People hear this in 2021 and think, oh, old-timey, whatever, ancient history. 1889 was yesterday. Yeah. I mean, 1889 was modern America. Like, one of the crazy things about the land run is it was a modern media event. Like, you had mass media, full-on newspapers, magazines. Harper's Magazine, which you can still go buy at a newsstand, was there reporting on the land run. The first train car that came in, when the first train came in, afternoon, was full of media members. So this was a self-consciously modern, monitored, reported on event. And again, we're basically 10 years from the year 1900. So America is like closed. Free land in America is kind of, that's an old story. The gold rushes are all basically done. The free land, the manifest destiny is kind of shut off. And so to have this literally free land, if you're the right kind of person, in the middle of the country, it's a miracle to people, and that's what sets off this total bonanza.
I was going to add to that because, you sort of hinted at it, if you're the right kind of people. Like, Black people are also looking at this like, hey, this might be our shot. This might be our 40 acres and a mule a little bit late. But, like, their opportunity to be able to take part in this, or single women's ability to be able to take part of this, everyone is looking at land and still very much equating land with wealth and equating land with this idea of it's more than opportunity. It's an ability to create sort of like a stronghold for your family, economically speaking. This is like what you pass down to your kids and your kids' kids, and it stays within generations. You have this land. But the other aspect of that too was that, there were people who lived on this land. I mean, when we think about Indian removal and we think about the Trail of Tears, like, the Cherokee and the Chickasaw and the Choctaw and all of these Native American groups are present at this moment as well. And
the settlers have to be, because again, so this what white settlers called the unassigned land had only been quote unquote unassigned for about 30 years. It had been occupied by the Seminole and Creek tribes before that, who had been in one of the infinite line of dominoes of like treaty breaking and just total betrayal by the U.S. government, who had been cleared out after the Civil War. And that's when this land, which was surrounded on all sides by what continued to be Indian territory, guaranteed, as long as the grass grows and the waters run, was suddenly open. And the government didn't know what to do with it. And white settlers all around it in Kansas and Texas, of course, started going crazy for this land and saying, that's for us. We are citizens of this country. That's not occupied by anybody. Give it to us. Now, the native people all around that unassigned land in Indian territory were like, don't let these white people into the middle of Indian territory, because they knew, of course, like, you inject white people into the center of the last territory held for indigenous people on this continent, and the rest is going to crumble too, which is exactly what happened. So they tried to keep them out. And even on Land Run Day, part of the process was people had been flocking from around the world to Kansas and Texas and all these places around Indian territory. And to prepare for Land Run Day, the troops had to march all these settlers through actual Indian territory. And so the people there had to watch them come through and be like, well, there it goes. And they were right. It didn't take long before the rest of Indian territory kind of crumbles as well.
I want to talk a little bit about this notion of this being a modern event, because, as chaotic as it was and as sort of ramshackle as it seems, there was a very sort of like technocratic, I guess, like idea at the heart of this, or very modern idea, which is basically we can create a metropolis overnight. We can kind of will this from nothing into a modern city. And so can you talk about some of those sort of like big ideas around the just basically instant creation of Oklahoma City?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a lot of sort of fantasies of, right, a lot of the stuff that comes along with Manifest Destiny, these kind of fantasies of civilization versus wilderness, and especially like the white civilizing force doing something productive with land that has been wasted for all these thousands of years. And so you had, I mean, starting much earlier than the land run, you had these raids of white people agitating for settlement who were building like model cities in the middle of the unassigned lands and then being arrested and taken out. And they were essentially just like mowing giant streets, like mowing street grids and saying, look what we could do with this land if you gave it to us. And the federal government was like, get out of here, it's not yours. So there absolutely was this fantasy. I mean, the amazing thing about it is what an obvious fantasy that was and how unrealistic it was, because the land run, again, yeah, total chaos. And because it was essentially a media event, we have all these firsthand accounts of what happened. And I mean, the moment the signals went off, you got people racing across the prairie in these wagons that are not meant for rough riding. And so they're busting apart on creek beds and buffalo wallows, and people are shooting to speed their horses up and accidentally shooting each other, and horses are dying of exhaustion. And so then you have all these people arriving at what they consider the best town sites in the area. And these are places usually where the railroad tracks that have been built through not long before cross over rivers. And Oklahoma City is one of those. Guthrie is another. And so you get these clusters of, up to 10,000 people in a matter of hours. And people are claiming land, and they're claiming what they think is the most advantageous land. And there are people, there are cheaters who have set up with surveying teams and already laid out streets by the time they get there. And they're offering to sell people town lots on no authority whatsoever. There's no governmental authority. There's no structure whatsoever set up. And so people are running around buying lots on dubious legal standing or just claiming lots. And the lots end up naturally just being, it's just chock-a-block private property. The entire area becomes solid private property, which of course, anyone who knows how a town works, you need a street to go down between the private property, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a park would be nice, like a real luxury.
A store.
It's just something. Negative space. Any kind of negative space would be cool. But that doesn't exist in Oklahoma City. So people wake up the next morning and look around and are like, what did we just do? And where are we? And what is this place? And how is it going to function? And so you get this really like grinding, horrible process of trying to impose rational order and some sense of real functional community living on this space. And it's kind of a miracle that the whole thing didn't blow up and just cease to exist. But I write about a real hero, this kind of lawyer guy, Angelo Scott, who kind of took the reins and was the voice of reason in helping people to figure out what was really in the collective interest.
I think that's so fascinating because, there are no policing forces. Like there's no sort of like town sheriff yet, or someone who's bringing law and order, or the idea that that you could get into these violent, deadly fights, and there's not a lot of like consequence or repercussions for these actions. People are just moving on their own, and that's just wild to me.
Yeah, it's such a great parable of America and our fantasies of individual freedom and property versus any kind of reasonable collective sense of what it means to live together with other human beings. I mean, there's one great story from those first hours where a guy claimed there was one well there in the area. There was a little railroad station, so they had set up kind of very basics of living, and there was one well with drinking water, and a guy claimed it as his plot, and he stood up against it with his guns drawn and said, "Anybody want a drink of water? 5 cents." And he's just raking it in because, we're thirsty. We just raced a lot of miles across the prairie and almost died 12 times. And so I would like a drink of water. I guess I will pay you a nickel, which is a lot of money at that time.
Yeah.
And he did this for some hours. And then finally the federal troops who were nominally in charge came and kicked him off and said, we're going to go ahead and reclaim this well for the public interest. So there were lots of stories like that. So it's just such a perfectly American parable.
And libertarianism run amok, which is also a
absolutely, yeah,
nice lesson.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that DNA, as you trace, goes all the way through to modern day Oklahoma and Oklahoma City. We should clarify and point out, this is where we get the term Sooners, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Oklahoma Sooners, who are still the mascot of the University of Oklahoma. A Sooner, most people don't know, is a great synonym would just be a cheater. Somebody who somebody who went early, who camped out. I mean, there were people who lived like in holes, who hid in the bushes along creeks inside the unassigned lands for weeks before this thing opened up. And there's this incredible scene that I describe in the book of the federal captain who's kind of in charge, waiting at what will become Oklahoma City. At the moment all the signals are sent. Now he's 15 miles from the nearest border of the unassigned land, so he's ready to wait for a while, for an hour or so, for people to start arriving. The moment the bugle sounds in the middle of the unassigned lands, people start popping out of the bushes. People start riding up on horses from nowhere. People are leaping out of train cars and from under train cars parked on the tracks, and it's instant city. And he's completely overwhelmed right away. So there's no delay whatsoever. And those are the Sooners.
And it's so fitting, right? Because it's stolen land and it's all broken contracts and treaties. And so, of course, it's also just like people who are like, we know the rules don't apply. We've seen how this all has been working out. And it worked out for them.
Wow.
Totally. It's such a perfect little episode of white supremacy, manifest destiny, libertarianism, a kind of like blind self-interest and faith that will somehow work out. So I think way more people should know about this. I mean, I just couldn't believe when I started writing this book, I'd heard, I think, the term, land run, land rush. I kind of knew what it was a little bit, but I started reading details and just instantly could not believe this ever happened on Earth. And I don't know why more people don't know this story.
Yeah.
Well, now they need to all run out and buy your book.
I know.
Okay. Yeah.
Buy the book. And then sell the film rights.
Well, to that end, Sam, I mean, your book is about so much more than just this moment. It is about Oklahoma City, but it's all built around, I mean, you used the phrase earlier, instant city, right? And I think that captures so much. Boomtown, also great title, but I think it captures so much about how Oklahoma sees itself. So paint that picture for us about how you feel like this notion of we are an instant city carries forward to this day.
I mean, I think it's really in the DNA of the place. It's a city, again, that formed instantly very late in American history and has been, since that moment of formation, intensely self-conscious about its place in America and its status in America, and hysterically wants to be considered a real city, a real major American place, on par with any rival city you could care to name. And so you can point to dozens of ridiculous decisions that city planners have made since the land run to try to kind of vault this place from the third tier of American cities up into the first tier. And that goes from everything from like its truly disastrous approach to urban renewal in the mid-20th century to its scandalous acquisition in the 21st century of this NBA basketball team, the Thunder, which it essentially stole from Seattle in an effort to make itself what it called a big league city. And so it really just marks the place. I came to love Oklahoma City, but it does have this kind of civic inferiority complex that really drives it in an extreme way. I mean, I think all cities have some flavor of this, but it's really extreme in Oklahoma City.
I'm curious because we're also just a few days off from the anniversary of the bombing in Oklahoma City, which I think is, for many Americans, the association that they make with Oklahoma City. And I was wondering, especially because of the tension that runs through this kind of white supremacy, libertarianism, and the presence of the federal government in that space, is there a connection between the story that we're telling about the 1889 and the events that unfold in Oklahoma City, more than a century later?
Whew, that's a great question. And it's one, absolutely yes. And it's one that I think is really important to understand, and it's one that's also extremely sensitive to the people in Oklahoma City. And some of the people I really love in Oklahoma City have gotten very angry at me when I make this connection. You look at, I've been thinking about Timothy McVeigh, who perpetrated this bombing in 1995 a lot over the last 5 years in America, because he is, in a way, what he was doing was he was trying to blow up and succeeding in blowing up a federal building somewhere in America. He wasn't from Oklahoma. He chose it because it was an easy target. He could drive right up and blow it up. In order to strike a blow at the heart of the federal government and start a new American revolution. He was an extreme white supremacist, kind of libertarian, gun rights maniac who was using all the rhetoric that would become common in the Tea Party, 15 years after him, and extremely common in the America First Trumpist movement. And to me, when I walk through that bombing memorial in the middle of Oklahoma City, which is one of the most moving, beautiful places I've ever been, I go to the bombing memorial literally every single day I'm in Oklahoma City. I walk through it. And part of what I think about is this is a monument to a strain of white supremacist American extremism and the violence that that it can do, the violence that it is designed to do, that it inevitably does at all different scales all the time. And that's what this beautiful memorial is a monument to, the violence that white supremacy does. And so when I see people in Oklahoma lining up behind a figure like Trump and these white supremacist ideas, I want to point to that memorial and say, this is what that's about. This is what that leads to. This is what violence against the government leads to. Timothy McVeigh would have been Trump supporter number one and would have been rioting at the Capitol on January 6th. This is just ideologically all the same stuff that he believed in. And people get really upset with me when I say that. To me, it's not controversial in any way. It's not an interpretive leap. It's just connecting two dots that are right next to each other. So
it's kind of a hell of an epilogue too. You know what I mean? And when you think about like the bookends of a city, of a place. I hate to leave it there, but there's so much about like these ideas that serve as really a microcosm for how we understand just America in general.
Yeah. And I try not to be like, I don't think I'm fatalistic about it. I have some optimism and some hope. And again, I came to love Oklahoma City, and I came to love a lot of people in Oklahoma City. And I think it's just, there's so much power in learning this actual history and naming it. And there was so much so much goodness and beauty in the city's response to the bombing in particular, and there's so much depth in the community there that I feel like is antithetical to that kind of ideology. And so I would tell people when I speak in Oklahoma City, I always talk about white supremacy, and I say trying to understand Oklahoma City without talking about white supremacy is like trying to understand the world without talking about gravity. It's just why the city is where it is and is shaped like it is and everything about it. And I think in a way, if you can accept that as a white person and just understand the truth of that history, like it's a little bit liberating in a way. You don't have to be so defensive about it. It's just like this is a system that we were all caught up in, and it's not a program that we have to keep playing out. Like we can actually do something about this. So I try to be a little optimistic about it. But this is the story of America contained in this one place, just like a very exaggerated form of the story of America. And what I found was I could not tell that story without going deep on white supremacy, because that's the story of America.
Yeah, so, I was going to say.
So
can
relax,
you tell
Oklahoma.
The story of America?
No, you can't. And that's what Oklahoma City taught me. And so, I mean, many other places could have taught me that. It's just that this book came along at the right time for me to do that deep dive and like teach myself. It's just the story of America, which is a really heartbreaking, disturbing, sad, weird, absurd, hilarious, tragic story. You know?
A comedy in the real Greco sense of it.
Yeah, totally.
And, you know, one in which, as you're saying, all of the strands connect and matter. And I think that's kind of one of the joys of, and just sort of like miracles of your book, Sam, is like that it is, let me see if I can list all the things. You know, I probably am going to miss things, but, you know, there's basketball, civil rights, tornadoes, the land rush, indie rock, you know, I mean, all of these things do
barbecue.
Feel specific and big. Yeah, there is food. There's food. But yeah, I mean, and so, you know, it's just this like tour de force and this realization that all these strands do connect, and both in their specific ways and in these larger ways. So thank you for writing the book, and thank you for joining us today. This was really great.
My pleasure. I love the podcast, so I'm happy to be on it. Let me know next time a historical date comes up that I've said something about.
We will, for sure. Okay, well, Sam Anderson, writer for the New York Times Magazine and the author of Boomtown. Thanks again. And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
And Nicole Hammer, thanks to you.
Thanks, Jody.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Kala Nakua helps with our transcripts, which you can find at our website, thisdaypod.com. Also on our website is a way to get in touch with us and a way to support the show directly if you would like. You can become a monthly member or you can give a one-time donation. Thank you so much for doing that. Follow us on social media. We're at thisdaypod on Instagram and Twitter. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon. Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. If you feel like you're wasting time and money with your current business software, or just want to know what you could be missing, then you'll need to join the millions of others who have switched to Odoo. Odoo is the affordable, all-in-one management software with a library of fully integrated business applications that help you get more done in less time for a fraction of the price. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Odoo, modern management made simple.
Radiotopia.